Forget the monsters who scream and threaten, the ones who never raised their voice, never drew attention, never gave you a reason to worry. Those are the ones that stay with you. These 7 characters proved it. Let's begin.
And don't even think about anybody coming for you. Not the doctors, not your agent, not your family, because I never called them. Nobody knows you're here. And you better hope nothing happens to me. Because if I die, you die.
Annie Wilkes, Misery, 1990. Annie Wilkes lives alone in the middle of nowhere. No colleagues, no social life, no small talk. She is, by every visible measure, a woman who has simply chosen solitude, a former nurse who retreated from the world and found comfort in routine, in her animals, and in books. Paul Sheldon's books, specifically. When she rescues Paul from a car crash and brings him into her home, she presents herself as devoted, caring even, and in a strange way, she is. Annie doesn't fake her love for Paul's work. It's the most genuine thing about her. The problem is that Annie's version of love has no room for the other person's autonomy. It never did. What makes Annie so psychologically fascinating is that her pathology isn't rooted in malice. It's rooted in need. She isn't cruel because she enjoys cruelty. She's cruel because she cannot tolerate disappointment. The moment reality fails to match her expectations, something switches. The warmth doesn't fade gradually. It cuts off, and what replaces it is something she herself doesn't seem to fully understand. This is the introvert's specific danger, a rich inner world so consuming, so self-referential that other people stop being people and become characters in a story she's already written. Paul Sheldon isn't a man to Annie. He's an extension of her fantasy. And when he tries to assert himself as something more than that, she reaches for a sledgehammer. She never raised her voice when she didn't have to. She never needed to.
I saw you blast Faraday right off the court in South Orange last season. Made the semifinals, didn't you? Yeah. Oh, I certainly admire people who do things.
Bruno, Strangers on a Train, 1951. Bruno Antony is the kind of man you might enjoy sitting next to on a train. He's charming in an offbeat way, curious, well-read, and surprisingly easy to talk to for about the first 10 minutes. Then you notice that he doesn't really ask questions. He makes statements. He fills in your answers before you give them. He's not interested in a conversation. He's interested in a confirmation. Bruno has spent his entire life inside his own head, not out of shyness. He can perform sociability when it suits him, but because the world outside never quite matched the one he constructed internally. He lives with his mother, detached from any real responsibility, floating through an existence that has given him too much time to think and too little reason to care about consequences. The strangers on a train idea, that 2 people could swap murders, each killing for the other, leaving no traceable motive, feels less like a spontaneous thought and more like something Bruno had been quietly entertaining for a long time. Whether or not that's true, he presents it with the ease of a man who has already made his peace with it. This is what makes Bruno so specifically chilling. He isn't reactive. He isn't impulsive. His darkness is theoretical, carefully constructed, intellectually entertained, and then, at a certain point, quietly acted upon. He doesn't lose control. He makes a decision. And the most unsettling part is that he seems genuinely surprised when Guy doesn't hold up his end of the deal. In Bruno's mind, it was always a reasonable proposal. The loneliness was always there. The logic came later.
It is your nature to do one thing correctly. Tremble. But fear is not what you owe me. No, Lowndes. You and the others. You owe me all.
Francis Dolarhyde, Manhunter, 1986. Francis Dolarhyde is not someone you would notice. That's the point. He works a technical job, keeps to himself, doesn't socialize beyond what's required. He is physically imposing, but emotionally invisible. The kind of man who has spent so long being overlooked that he has built an entire internal universe to compensate for the one that never had room for him. A childhood defined by abandonment, cruelty, and a cleft palate that made him a target before he was old enough to understand why. The world taught Francis Dolarhyde very early that he was something to be ashamed of. He learned the lesson well. What Michael Mann understands about Dolarhyde, and what Tom Noonan's performance captures with extraordinary precision, is that the monster didn't arrive from nowhere. It was constructed, piece by piece, out of humiliation and silence. Dolarhyde sees himself as something becoming. He has built a mythology around his violence, drawn from William Blake's painting The Great Red Dragon, and in his mind, what he is doing is transformation, his own above all else. This is the tragedy at the center of his character. There is a moment in the film where he meets a blind woman named Reba, and for the first time, something human surfaces. She cannot see his face, she cannot see his scars, and in that blindness, he finds the closest thing to acceptance he has ever experienced. It almost reaches him. Almost.
Hey, what are you guys doing?
Just get the fuck out of here and don't come back. Some heavy shit's going on.
What are you doing?
Willie, Alex, Elephant 2003. There is almost no plot in Elephant. That's the point. Gus Van Sant's camera follows teenagers through the halls of a suburban high school with the patience of a documentarian, unhurried, observational, indifferent. We watch them eat lunch, walk to class, talk about nothing in particular. And somewhere in these halls, two boys are planning something. Alex and Eric don't announce themselves. They don't brood visibly, don't write manifestos on their faces. They are quiet in the way that reads, to most people, as unremarkable. They play video games. They order weapons online. They take a shower together in a moment that Van Sant films with the same flat neutrality as everything else, which is precisely what makes it so disorienting. There is no musical cue telling you how to feel. There is no villain reveal. There is just the accumulation of ordinary moments, and then there isn't. What Van Sant refuses to do, and this is what separates Elephant from every other film that has tried to grapple with school violence, is explain. There is no single cause, no clean psychological diagnosis, no moment where we can point and say, that's where it went wrong. The film implicates everything and absolves nothing. Bullying exists in these halls, yes. Isolation exists, boredom exists, but Van Sant is too honest to reduce what happened to any one of them. The most chilling thing about Alex and Eric is how little separates them from everyone else in the building. They walked the same halls. They just saw them differently. Kevin. We need to talk about Kevin, 2011. Kevin doesn't throw tantrums. He doesn't act out in the ways that would demand intervention, nothing concrete enough to act on, nothing that couldn't be explained away. He is controlled, deliberate. And from a very early age, he seems to understand something that most children don't, that the most effective way to cause damage is to stay just inside the line. What makes Kevin one of the most disturbing characters in recent cinema is precisely this absence of the signals we've been taught to look for. He isn't visibly troubled. He isn't isolated in an obvious way. He functions, at school, in front of his father, in social situations where it serves him. The introversion isn't incapacity, it's strategy. Kevin retreats inward not because the world overwhelms him, but because he has already assessed it and found it beneath him. Lynn Ramsey's film is told almost entirely through the mother's perspective, which means we are always one step removed from certainty. Is Kevin genuinely empty, or is this a story about a woman who never bonded with her child and is now constructing a narrative to explain what happened? The film refuses to resolve this. But what it does show, quietly, in accumulated detail, is a child who seems to experience other people's pain not as something to avoid causing, but as information, something to file away. Tilda Swinton carries the film's emotional weight, but it's Ezra Miller's performance that makes it unforgettable. He gives Kevin a stillness that never reads as peace. It reads as patience. He was waiting. He just never told anyone what for. Norman Bates, Psycho, 1960. Norman Bates runs a motel. He stuffs birds. He is painfully, almost unbearably shy. When Marion Crane checks into the Bates motel, Norman is flustered by her presence in the way of someone who has simply forgotten how to be around people, or perhaps never learned. He stammers. He avoids eye contact. He makes sandwiches and talks about his mother, and seems, above all else, like someone who needs looking after rather than someone to be afraid of. Hitchcock understood something essential about the nature of threat. The most effective kind doesn't announce itself. It apologizes for being in the room. Norman's psychology is one of the most analyzed in cinema history, and for good reason. What Hitchcock and Anthony Perkins constructed is a portrait of a man who has been so completely consumed by another person, his mother, that he has no stable self left to speak of. The introversion is a symptom. Norman retreated so far inward that the boundary between himself and his mother dissolved entirely. What lives in that space where a self should be is something that even Norman doesn't fully understand. This is the character that set the template. Every quiet, mild-mannered, seemingly harmless cinematic psychopath that came after Norman Bates owes him something. He is the reason we now look twice at the shy ones, the gentle ones, the ones who seem like they wouldn't hurt a fly. He wouldn't. She might.
Even though he made you and your girlfriend perform demeaning sexual acts for his own gratification.
No, you don't understand. There was no other way for him to cast out his own demons.
Aaron Stampler, Primal Fear, 1996. Aaron Stampler is a 19-year-old altar boy from Kentucky. He speaks softly with a stutter so severe it seems to cost him something every time he opens his mouth and looks at you with the eyes of someone who has been frightened for so long that fear has become his resting expression. When he is arrested for the brutal murder of a prominent Chicago archbishop, the city's most ambitious defense attorney takes his case, not out of conviction, but out of ego. Martin Vale believes in reasonable doubt. What he doesn't expect is Aaron. The introversion here is total and apparently genuine. Aaron flinches at loud noises. He struggles to make eye contact. He speaks about the archbishop with a reverence that seems unperformed, and about the night of the murder with a confusion that reads as authentic trauma. He presents in every visible way as a victim of poverty, of abuse, of circumstances that placed him in the wrong place with the wrong man at the wrong time. Edward Norton's performance is the reason this film works. He plays Aaron's vulnerability with such specificity and restraint that the audience does exactly what Martin Vale does. They stop looking. They accept the surface. They fill in the rest with sympathy. This is the film's central argument, and it is a deeply unsettling one. We think we can read people. We think that genuine shyness, genuine fear, genuine vulnerability are things we would recognize, that they couldn't be replicated by someone who simply understood how they worked. Aaron Stampler is what happens when that assumption is wrong. The last scene recontextualizes every quiet, frightened person you've ever given the benefit of the doubt. Cinema keeps trying to show us what a monster looks like. These 7 films suggest it looks like someone you'd never think to watch, someone quiet, someone forgettable, someone you'd probably feel sorry for. Thank you for watching.